You know what's wild? I used to think self-awareness was the answer to everything. Like, once I figured out my patterns and behaviors, life would just click into place. But here's what nobody talks about. Sometimes knowing yourself becomes the exact thing that keeps you stuck. Alright, so we need to talk about something that's been eating at me lately. Self-awareness is supposed to be this magical thing that changes your life, right? Everyone's telling you to journal, meditate, figure out your triggers, understand your trauma. And don't get me wrong, that stuff matters. But I've noticed something really messed up happening. I started seeing it in myself first. I'd spend hours analyzing why I procrastinate. I'd dig deep into my childhood to understand my fear of rejection. I'd label every emotion, track every pattern, document every little thing about myself. And you know what happened? Absolutely nothing changed. I became really good at explaining why I was the way I was. Like, crazy good. I could tell you exactly why I avoid difficult conversations. I could break down my attachment style and how it affects my relationships. I could explain my self-sabotaging behaviors with perfect clarity. But I was still doing all those things. Still avoiding the hard conversations, still repeating the same relationship patterns, still sabotaging myself at every turn. Here's the thing. I thought awareness was the finish line. Like, once I understood the problem would just dissolve. But that's not how it works. Understanding why you do something doesn't automatically stop you from doing it. Think about it like this. You know smoking is bad for you, right? Everyone knows that. Smokers know it better than anyone. They've read the warnings, seen the pictures, heard all the statistics. They're probably more aware of the dangers than most non-smokers. Does that awareness make them quit? Not always. This is what I call awareness paralysis. It's when you become so obsessed with understanding yourself that you forget to actually change yourself. You're stuck in this loop of analysis, constantly digging deeper, finding new layers, uncovering more patterns. And it feels productive. That's the sneaky part. It feels like you're doing something. You're having these big realizations. You're connecting dots. You're understanding things about yourself that you never understood before. Your brain is giving you that hit of dopamine every time you have an insight. But insights without action are just thoughts. They're just stories you tell yourself about who you are and why you are that way. I see this all the time now. People who can perfectly articulate their problems, but never actually solve them. Someone who knows they have commitment issues and can trace it back to their parents' divorce, but still runs away from every relationship. Someone who understands they're a perfectionist because of childhood pressure, but still won't start that business. The awareness becomes a shield. It becomes an excuse. Oh, I can't help it. This is just how I'm wired. I know I do this because of my past. I'm aware of my patterns, but changing them is hard. And look, I get it. Change is hard, really hard, but awareness without change is just sophisticated avoidance. Here's where it gets even darker. Sometimes self-awareness becomes a form of self-obsession. You become so focused on your inner world that you forget about the outer world. Every conversation becomes about you. Every situation gets filtered through your personal narrative. You're at dinner with friends, and someone shares a problem. Instead of just listening, you immediately relate it back to your own experience. Oh yeah, I struggle with that too because of my anxious attachment style. You've turned their moment into your therapy session. Or you're at work, and you mess up a project. Instead of just apologizing and fixing it, you launch into this whole explanation about your ADHD, or your perfectionism, or your fear of failure. You're using self-awareness as a justification instead of taking responsibility. There's also this weird competition that happens. People start wearing their self-awareness like a badge. I'm so self-aware that I know exactly why I do this thing I keep doing. It becomes almost like a status symbol. The more aware you are, the more evolved you seem. But being able to name your demons doesn't mean you've conquered them. Knowing your patterns doesn't mean you've broken them. I had a friend who was in therapy for years. She could analyze herself better than her therapist could. She knew all the psychology terms, understood all her triggers, could map out her entire emotional landscape. But her life looked exactly the same. Same toxic relationships, same self-destructive habits, same problems on repeat. One day I asked her, "What are you actually doing differently?" And she got defensive. She said, "I'm doing the work. I'm aware now. I understand myself." But understanding isn't doing. Awareness isn't action. This is the trap. We've been sold this idea that if you just understand yourself deeply enough, transformation will happen automatically. But that's not true. Transformation requires something else. It requires you to take what you know and actually use it to make different choices. Let me give you a real example from my own life. I realized I had this pattern of people-pleasing. I could tell you exactly where it came from. I knew the moments in my childhood that shaped it. I understood how it showed up in my relationships and my work. I was incredibly self-aware about it. But I still said yes to things I wanted to say no to. I still bent over backwards for people who didn't appreciate it. I still ignored my own needs to make others happy. The breakthrough didn't come from more awareness. It came when I started practicing saying no. When I started setting boundaries, even though it felt terrible. When I started choosing my needs over someone else's wants. Even when every fiber of my being screamed that I was being selfish. It was messy. I felt guilty. People were confused or upset. But that's when things actually started changing. Not when I understood the pattern, but when I broke it. Here's another layer to this. Sometimes people use self-awareness as a way to stay comfortable. If you're constantly analyzing why you're afraid of success, you never have to actually pursue success. If you're always processing your relationship trauma, you never have to risk getting hurt in a new relationship. The analysis becomes a safe place to hide. It's like you're moving, but you're on a treadmill. Lots of effort, no distance covered. And therapy can sometimes enable this if you're not careful. Don't get me wrong, therapy is amazing. But if you're using it just to understand yourself better, without ever implementing change, you're just paying someone to help you stay stuck in a more sophisticated way. I've also noticed how self-awareness can make you hypervigilant in a bad way. You start monitoring every thought, every feeling, every reaction. You're constantly checking in with yourself. Why did I feel that way? What does this mean about me? Is this my trauma response or a genuine reaction? You lose spontaneity. You lose the ability to just experience things without turning them into a self-analysis project. Everything becomes data about who you are instead of just life happening. There's this thing called the observer effect in physics, where the act of observing something changes it. I think the same thing happens with self-awareness. When you're constantly observing yourself, you're not fully living. You're watching yourself live, which is a different thing entirely. Plus, you can become so aware of your flaws that you start to identify with them. They become part of your identity. I'm an overthinker. I'm a perfectionist. I'm someone with trust issues. These labels were supposed to help you understand yourself, but now they've become who you are. And once something becomes part of your identity, changing it feels like losing yourself. So you hold on to these patterns because they're familiar. They're you, even if they're making you miserable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes you need less self-awareness and more self-forgetfulness. You need to stop thinking about yourself so much and just do the thing that scares you. Stop analyzing why you're afraid and just be afraid while doing it anyway. Action creates clarity that thinking never will. You can think about starting a business for years, analyzing every risk and every fear. Or you can just start and learn as you go. You'll understand yourself better through doing than through thinking about doing. I'm not saying self-awareness is bad. It's not. It's a tool, a really important tool. But it's just the first step, not the whole journey. It's the diagnosis, not the cure. The people who actually change their lives are the ones who take their awareness and channel it into action. They notice the pattern and then interrupt it. They understand the fear and then do the scary thing anyway. They recognize the old behavior and choose a new one even when it's uncomfortable. Real growth happens in that gap between knowing and doing. It happens when you feel the urge to do the old thing and you do something different instead. When you notice you're about to self-sabotage and you choose differently. When you see the pattern playing out in real time and you break it. That's where the magic is. Not in the understanding, but in the choosing differently. And yeah, you're going to mess up. You're going to slip back into old patterns. But that's fine. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to slowly, gradually make different choices more often than you make the old ones. One choice at a time, one moment at a time. That's how change actually happens. So if you're stuck in analysis mode, if you've been working on yourself for years, but nothing's really different, this is your sign. Stop trying to understand yourself better and start doing something different. Take one small action that goes against your usual pattern. If you're a people pleaser, say no to one thing today. If you're a perfectionist, intentionally do something imperfectly. If you avoid conflict, have one difficult conversation. Just one thing. One action that proves to yourself that you can choose differently. Because at the end of the day, who you are isn't determined by what you know about yourself. It's determined by what you do. Your actions are who you are. Not your insights, not your realizations, not your understanding. You can be the most self-aware person in the world, but if your life looks the same as it did 5 years ago, what's the point? Self-awareness without self-change is just self-indulgence. So use your awareness as a starting point, not a parking spot. Let it inform your actions, not replace them. Know yourself so you can change yourself, not so you can excuse yourself. The dark side of self-awareness is real. It can trap you in your own head, make you passive, turn into an excuse. But it doesn't have to. You get to decide what you do with what you know. If this hit home, subscribe for more honest talks about the stuff nobody else wants to say.